The dragon-headed prow of a longship slices through the gray morning mist, its silhouette a terrifying omen against the dawn. On the shore, within the stone walls of a holy sanctuary, the toll of a prayer bell is answered not by divine silence, but by the splintering of wood and the chilling war cry of strange, bearded men. The air, once filled with gentle psalms, is now thick with the scent of fear and burning timber. This is an attack on God himself, a violation of a world that believed itself to be protected. At stake in this moment is more than just a single building. It is the repository of a kingdom's faith, a library of priceless, illuminated manuscripts, and the lives of the unarmed monks who have dedicated themselves to a peaceful existence. For the wider world, what hangs in the balance is the very notion of a safe harbor. If a holy island, a beacon of learning and piety, can be so brutally violated, what place on earth is truly safe from the fury of the sea? This is the potential end of an age of tranquility. The protagonists of this brutal drama are the Norsemen. To the terrified monks, they are demons spat from the mouth of hell itself. But in their own minds, they are men from the north, warriors and sailors forged by harsh lands of ice and stone. They are farmers seeking new land, chieftains seeking glory, and merchants seeking wealth in a world ripe for the taking. They are not a mindless horde, but a people on the move, driven by ambition, guided by the stars, empowered by an unparalleled mastery of the sea. Who were these sea wolves who erupted so suddenly and violently from the mists of the north to shatter the peace of Christian Europe? What force could compel them to cross the treacherous Whale Road, to attack holy men, and to desecrate the sacred spaces of a foreign god? What is the name of this violent event, this bloody dawn that would be remembered in the chronicles of history as the beginning of a new and terrifying chapter for the world? The answer is the raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne, off the coast of Northumbria, in the year 793. The immediate aftermath was a scene of unparalleled devastation. Monks were slaughtered, the altar was stripped of its gold, and sacred relics were stolen or destroyed. Survivors who were not killed were dragged away in chains to be sold as slaves. For the Anglo-Saxons, it was a profound shock, a sign that their world had changed irrevocably. The Viking Age had just announced its arrival with the swing of an axe. History is not a gentle tide, it is often a storm that breaks without warning. The raid on Lindisfarne was such a storm, a single, violent moment that was the opening chapter in a saga that would span 3 centuries and reshape the map of the known world. It was the beginning of a story that would see these raiders become rulers, explorers, and settlers, transforming not only the lands they touched, but also themselves in the process. To understand the fury, one must first understand the homeland. Late 8th century Scandinavia was a patchwork of petty chiefdoms, a land of deep fjords, dark forests, and limited fertile soil. It was a society bound by a fierce code of honor, where a man's worth was measured by his loyalty to his chieftain, his prowess in battle, and the wealth he could win. Overpopulation and political consolidation by ambitious local kings pushed many younger sons to seek their fortunes and glory abroad. The sea was not a barrier, it was their highway. The key to this new age of expansion was a masterpiece of naval engineering, the longship. Clinker-built for strength and flexibility, with a shallow draft and a symmetrical design, this vessel was the perfect instrument of the raid. It was fast enough to outrun any contemporary ship, yet could navigate rivers just a meter deep, allowing the Vikings to bypass coastal defenses and strike at the wealthy, unsuspecting heartlands of kingdoms. It could carry warriors across the open ocean and then land them directly on a beach, ready for battle. The initial attacks were overwhelmingly hit-and-run raids. Small fleets would appear without warning, targeting coastal and riverside settlements that were wealthy but poorly defended. Monasteries were perfect targets, functioning as the undefended banks of the early medieval world, rich in gold, silver, and other portable treasures. The goal was simple: get in, seize as much loot and as many slaves as possible, and be gone before any organized military response could be mustered. There were ghosts who struck and vanished back into the sea. The Vikings quickly learned that their reputation was as powerful a weapon as their axes. Their pagan gods and their seemingly fearless savagery in battle horrified the Christian populations of Europe. To many, these Northmen were not mere pirates, but a literal divine punishment, the wrath of God made manifest. The Vikings cultivated this image of terror, knowing that fear was a powerful tool that could paralyze their enemies, making their raids even more successful and their demands for tribute more likely to be met without a fight. By the mid-9th century, the nature of the attacks began to change. The era of simple raiding started to evolve into one of conquest. This shift was epitomized by the arrival of the Great Heathen Army in England in 865. This was not a small fleet of raiders, it was a massive invading force, a coalition of several warbands, possibly numbering in the thousands. Their objective was not just plunder, but land. They had come not just to raid England, but to conquer it and settle it for themselves. The army was led by a new generation of legendary Viking commanders, including the sons of the famous Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan, and Ubba. Ivar in particular was known as a master strategist, a man whose physical ailment was belied by a brilliant and ruthless military mind. These were not just warriors, they were generals who understood logistics, strategy, and the political weaknesses of their opponents. They planned to systematically dismantle the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms one by one. The Great Heathen Army swept through England with terrifying efficiency. They quickly overran the kingdom of Northumbria, capturing its capital and renaming it Jorvik. Next, they conquered East Anglia, whose king, Edmund, was martyred for refusing to renounce his faith. The kingdom of Mercia soon followed, its king driven into exile. Within a few short years, 3 of the 4 major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had fallen. Only the southern kingdom of Wessex remained defiant, the last bastion of English resistance. The defense of that last kingdom fell to its ruler, Alfred the Great. For years, Wessex was pushed to the brink of collapse. Alfred was forced into hiding in the marshes of Somerset, waging a desperate guerrilla war against the seemingly invincible invaders. The stakes could not have been higher: the survival of his kingdom, the English language, and the Christian faith in Britain. It was a struggle for the very soul of England, fought in the mud and swamps by a king who refused to be broken. Alfred's perseverance paid off. He secretly gathered a new army and in 878 launched a surprise attack on the Viking forces at the Battle of Edington. The victory was total and decisive. It shattered the aura of invincibility surrounding the Great Heathen Army. The subsequent treaty between Alfred and the Viking leader Guthrum was a landmark moment. It formally divided England, establishing a vast territory in the north and east where Norse law and customs would hold sway. This territory would become known as the Danelaw. The establishment of the Danelaw marks the definitive shift from Viking raider to settler. In this new territory, Norsemen put down their axes and picked up plows. They became farmers, traders, and craftsmen, intermarrying with the local Anglo-Saxon population. Cities like York, now Jorvik, became major centers of Scandinavian trade and culture. This blending of peoples left a permanent mark, enriching the English language with hundreds of Norse words like sky, egg, law, and window, and shaping the genetic and cultural landscape of northern England forever. While England was being partitioned, the kingdoms of Francia were facing their own Viking fury. The once mighty empire of Charlemagne had fragmented, and its internal weaknesses were ruthlessly exploited. Viking fleets sailed up the Seine, the Loire, and other great rivers, sacking towns and monasteries deep in the Frankish heartland. The culmination of these attacks was the Great Siege of Paris in 885, where a huge Viking fleet held the city ransom for months, a testament to their military power and ambition. The constant pressure on Francia led to a novel solution. In 911, the Frankish king, Charles the Simple, made a deal with a powerful Viking chieftain named Rollo. Charles granted Rollo and his men the territory around the lower Seine River. In return, Rollo was to be baptized, become a vassal of the king, and crucially, protect the kingdom from any future Viking incursions. This grant of land created a new, powerful duchy, Normandy, the land of the Northmen. The transformation of the Vikings in Normandy was astonishingly rapid. These Northmen quickly assimilated into Frankish culture. Within a few generations, they had abandoned their Norse language for French, wholeheartedly embraced Christianity, and adopted the feudal system of knights and castles. They did not lose their martial spirit, however, they simply channeled it. The Normans became one of Europe's most formidable and organized military forces, a potent fusion of Viking ferocity and Frankish sophistication. To the east, another wave of Scandinavian expansion was taking place, but this one followed a different path. Swedish Vikings, known to the Slavs and Byzantines as the Varangians or the Rus, journeyed not west to plunder, but south along the great river highways of what would become Russia. They navigated the Dnieper and the Volga, crossing a vast and wild continent in search of the riches of the south. These eastern Vikings were primarily merchants and mercenaries, not raiders. They established fortified trading posts along the rivers, dealing in the treasures of the forest, furs, honey, wax, and most lucratively, slaves. They bartered these goods for the silver dirhams of the Abbasid Caliphate and the luxurious silks and spices of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople. They were the connectors of worlds, linking the Baltic to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Over time, these Norse adventurers began to exert political control over the local Slavic tribes. According to ancient chronicles, a Varangian chieftain named Rurik was invited to rule and bring order to the region around 862. He and his successors established a dynasty that would create the first East Slavic state, a powerful federation known as the Kievan Rus. The name of their people, the Rus, would eventually be given to the entire land, Russia. So renowned were these northern warriors that the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople hired them as their personal bodyguards. This elite mercenary unit, known as the Varangian Guard, became legendary for its fierce loyalty and its prowess in battle. For centuries, serving in the Guard was a highly prestigious and profitable career for ambitious Scandinavians, including the future King of Norway, Harald Hardrada. They were the trusted protectors of the heart of Eastern Christendom. While their cousins were founding kingdoms in the east, other Norsemen were pushing the boundaries of the known world in the west. Driven by a thirst for new land and a desire to escape the growing power of kings in Norway, they embarked on daring voyages across the treacherous North Atlantic. In the late 9th century, they discovered and began to settle Iceland, a vast, uninhabited volcanic island where they created a unique new society, governed by a parliamentary assembly known as the Althing. The spirit of exploration continued to push them westward. Around 982, a fiery chieftain named Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland for manslaughter, set sail in search of lands rumored to lie to the west. He discovered a colossal, icebound island. In a masterful act of public relations, he named it Greenland to attract settlers. Against all odds, he established a viable Norse colony that would survive for nearly 500 years on the very edge of the habitable world. The final legendary leap across the Atlantic was made by Eric the Red's own son, Leif Erikson. Around the year 1000, guided by tales from other sailors who had been blown off course, Leif purposefully set sail from Greenland to the west. He and his crew made landfall on the coast of what is now Canada. They had reached North America, which they named Vinland, the land of wine, for the wild grapes they found there. They were the first Europeans to set foot in the New World. The Norse established a small settlement in Vinland, the remains of which have been discovered at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. However, the colony did not last. The distance from their Greenland home base was immense, making resupply and reinforcement nearly impossible. More importantly, they were not settling in empty land. They encountered indigenous peoples whom they called Skraelings, and their relations quickly turned hostile. Outnumbered and isolated, the Vikings abandoned their American foothold after only a few years. By the 11th century, the storm that had begun at Lindisfarne was beginning to calm. The Viking Age was drawing to a close, not through defeat, but through transformation. Back in Scandinavia, the patchwork of petty chiefdoms had consolidated into large, centralized Christian kingdoms like Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The forces that had once driven raiders outward, overpopulation and political instability, had stabilized. The focus turned from external raiding to internal governance. The year 1066 serves as a dramatic bookend to the Viking Age. In September of that year, one of the last great Viking invasions was launched against England by the formidable King of Norway, Harald Hardrada. He was met and decisively defeated by the English King Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The age of large-scale Scandinavian raids on England was over, brought to a bloody conclusion on a Yorkshire battlefield. Yet the story of 1066 has a profound final twist. Just 3 weeks after his victory at Stamford Bridge, King Harold had to force march his exhausted army south to face another invader. This was William the Conqueror, the Duke of Normandy. At the Battle of Hastings, William was victorious, and the English king was killed. A new dynasty now sat on the throne of England. And William, the new king, was the direct descendant of the Viking chieftain Rollo. The Viking Age had ended, but its children now ruled. The legacy of the Vikings is far more complex than the horned-helmeted caricature suggests. They were not just destroyers. They were explorers who pushed the boundaries of the known world, traders who created vast networks connecting distant cultures, and settlers who founded new nations and left their genetic and linguistic mark from the fields of England to the plains of Russia. They began as a storm that broke upon the world, but like all storms, they passed, leaving behind a landscape that was irrevocably and profoundly changed.